Helena Marsh had made a career out of knowing when to look away. But on a Tuesday morning in late September, looking away would have meant watching a child die. The boy was small, silent, and barefoot in the crosswalk when the delivery truck ran the red light. Helena grabbed his arm and yanked him backwards so hard they both hit the pavement. When she looked into his face, dirt-streaked, hollow-eyed, and impossibly familiar, her heart stopped for an entirely different reason.
Helena's knees burned where they'd scraped the asphalt. The boy stared up at her with wide, dark eyes that didn't blink. Around them, morning commuters slowed, craned their necks, then kept walking. No one stopped. No one asked if they were all right. She pushed herself upright and brushed gravel from her palms. Her briefcase had skidded into the gutter, legal files spilling onto the wet pavement. The boy stood perfectly still, his thin shoulders rigid beneath a t-shirt 3 sizes too large. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just watched her with an expression she recognized from her own mirror, wariness honed by survival. "Are you hurt?" Helena asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The boy shook his head. She noticed his bare feet, the dirt crusted under his nails, the way his ribs pressed against the fabric of his shirt. "Where are your parents?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His lips moved silently, forming shapes she couldn't decipher. Then he closed his mouth and looked down. Helena's chest tightened. She'd spent 15 years as a corporate attorney, smoothing over scandals for pharmaceutical executives and real estate moguls. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to separate the world into billable hours and everything else. Children, especially vulnerable ones, fell firmly in the everything else category. She had no protocol for this. But she also couldn't leave him standing in the street. She gathered her scattered files and stuffed them into her briefcase. When she straightened, the boy was still there, waiting. His silence felt deliberate, purposeful, not the silence of fear, but something deeper, something practiced. "Come on," Helena said, surprising herself. "Let's get you cleaned up." She led him to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, a place called Morningside Brew, where she sometimes stopped before heading to the firm. The barista, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair, raised her eyebrows when they walked in. Helena ordered black coffee for herself and hot chocolate for the boy, then guided him to a corner booth. While he drank, she studied him. He was maybe 7 or 8, though malnutrition made it hard to tell. His hair was dark and tangled, his skin pale beneath the grime. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were the exact shade of amber her sister's had been, warm and flecked with gold like sunlight through honey. Helena's hand trembled as she reached for her coffee. She hadn't thought about Mara in 3 years, hadn't allowed herself to. The last time they'd spoken, Mara had been high and desperate, calling from a payphone somewhere in Nevada, begging for money Helena refused to send. "You're enabling her," the therapist had said. "Sometimes love means letting go." She'd let go, and 6 months later, Mara was dead. "What's your name?" Helena asked, her throat tight. The boy set down his mug and pulled a small, battered notebook from his pocket. He opened it to a blank page and wrote in careful block letters, "Owen." Helena stared at the name. Mara had been pregnant when she disappeared, but Helena had assumed, hoped, that the baby had been adopted, placed with a family who could give him stability. The alternative was too painful to consider. "Owen?" Helena repeated softly. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" He hesitated, then shook his head. Helena's pulse quickened. She should call child services. She should hand this over to people trained for situations like this. But when Owen looked at her, she saw Mara. Mara at 6 hiding under the kitchen table while their mother screamed at bill collectors. Mara at 12 practicing piano scales in the dark because their father had sold the lights to pay for his next fix. Mara at 16 promising she'd never end up like them. "Okay," Helena heard herself say, "you can stay with me. Just for tonight." Owen's eyes widened. For the first time, something like hope flickered across his face. Helena's stomach knotted. She was making a mistake. She knew she was making a mistake, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. They took a cab to her apartment in Riverside Heights, a sleek high-rise with marble lobbies and doormen who nodded without smiling. Owen pressed his face to the window as they rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, watching the city shrink below them. Helena's apartment was exactly what people expected from a corporate lawyer: modern, minimalist, and utterly impersonal. White walls, black furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the river. Owen stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly in place. Helena realized he was probably comparing it to wherever he'd been sleeping: a doorway, an alley, a shelter that turned him away because he couldn't explain who he was. "Bathroom's down the hall," she said, pointing. "Take a shower. I'll find you some clean clothes." While Owen bathed, Helena stood in her bedroom and stared at her phone. She should make the call. She should do the responsible thing. But her thumb hovered over the screen, unable to move. Instead, she opened her closet and pulled out an old sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants with a drawstring waist. They'd drown him, but they'd be clean. When Owen emerged, his hair was damp and his skin scrubbed pink. He looked younger somehow, more fragile. Helena handed him the clothes and watched him disappear back into the bathroom to change. When he returned, he was swimming in fabric, but his expression was calmer, almost peaceful. "Are you hungry?" she asked. He immediately nodded. Helena hadn't cooked in months. Her kitchen was a showpiece, barely used except for morning coffee. But she found eggs in the fridge and bread in the freezer, and she managed to produce something resembling scrambled eggs and toast. Owen ate like he hadn't seen food in days, shoveling forkfuls into his mouth without pausing. Helena sat across from him, her coffee growing cold. "Tomorrow," she said carefully, "we need to figure out where you belong." Owen stopped chewing. He looked at her with those amber eyes, Mara's eyes, and shook his head slowly. Then he reached for his notebook again and wrote, "I belong here." Helena's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to explain all the reasons that wasn't possible, but the words died in her throat. Because part of her, the part she'd buried under years of professional distance, wanted to believe him. Helena called in sick the next morning, the first time in 8 years. Her assistant sounded genuinely concerned, and Helena felt a flicker of guilt before hanging up. She stood in her kitchen, watching Owen eat pancakes she'd ordered from the diner downstairs. He ate slowly now, savoring each bite, and something about the simple act of feeding him made her chest ache. She needed answers. She needed to know if her instincts were right, or if grief was making her see connections that didn't exist. When Owen finished breakfast, she sat beside him at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. "I'm going to ask you some questions," she said gently. "You can write the answers, okay?" Owen nodded. Helena pulled up a blank document and angled the screen toward him. "Where were you born?" she typed. Owen's fingers moved slowly across the keyboard. "Carson City." Helena's stomach dropped. Mara had been in Carson City. That's where the last phone call had come from. She forced herself to continue. "What's your mother's name?" Owen hesitated, his small hands hovering over the keys. Then he typed, "Helena Marsh." The room tilted. Helena gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She'd known, somewhere deep down, but seeing it confirmed in black and white made it real. This wasn't a lost child. This was her nephew. This was the piece of Mara she thought was gone forever. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered, more to herself than to Owen. But Owen was already typing. "Mom said you didn't want us." The words hit like a physical blow. Helena stared at the screen, her vision blurring. Of course Mara had said that. Of course she'd twisted Helena's boundaries into rejection, her tough love into cruelty. It was easier than admitting she chose drugs over family, easier than facing the consequences of her choices. But it didn't make it hurt any less. Helena closed her eyes and counted to 10, a trick she'd learned in law school to control her emotions during cross-examinations. When she opened them, Owen was watching her with an expression that was far too knowing for a child. "Your mother was wrong," Helena said quietly. "I would have wanted you. I would have—" Her voice broke. She cleared her throat and tried again. "What happened to her?" Owen's face crumpled. He didn't type. He didn't need to. Helena understood. She reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were small and cold, and they gripped hers like a lifeline. They sat that way for a long time. Two people bound by loss and blood, neither one sure how to move forward. Finally, Helena stood. "We need to make this official," she said, her legal training kicking in. "I need to prove I'm your family. That means DNA tests, custody paperwork, maybe a court hearing." Owen's eyes widened with panic. He grabbed his notebook and scribbled frantically. "They will take me away." "No," Helena said firmly. "I won't let that happen. But we have to do this right." She made calls that afternoon while Owen sat on her couch watching cartoons with the sound muted. She contacted family lawyers she'd worked with on corporate cases, explained the situation in clipped professional terms. They told her what she already knew. Without legal documentation, Owen was a ward of the state. She'd need to file for emergency custody, prove her relationship, demonstrate she could provide a stable home. The DNA test was scheduled for Thursday. Helena spent the next 2 days in a strange liminal space, half expecting someone to knock on her door and take Owen away. But no one came. She bought him clothes that fit, enrolled him in online speech therapy programs, and taught him to use a tablet to communicate when his notebook wasn't enough. At night, she lay awake and listened to him breathe in the guest room. She'd put fresh sheets on the bed, cleared out the treadmill she'd been using as a clothes rack, and hung curtains to block the city lights. Owen had stood in the doorway for a long time before entering, as if testing to see if the offer was real. On Thursday morning, they took a cab to the clinic. The nurse was kind, explaining each step in a gentle voice as she swabbed the inside of Owen's cheek, then Helena's. "Results in 3 to 5 business days," she said, labeling the samples. Helena nodded, her lawyer's brain already calculating timelines, anticipating obstacles. But when they stepped outside, Owen tugged on her sleeve. He held up his tablet, where he'd typed, "Can we go to the park?" Helena checked her watch. She had a mountain of work waiting, emails piling up, clients expecting answers. But Owen was looking at her with such tentative hope that she found herself saying, "Yes, we can go to the park." They walked to Riverside Park, a sprawling green space along the water where joggers and dog walkers shared the paths with families pushing strollers. Owen ran ahead, then stopped and turned back, as if making sure she was still there. Helena followed at a slower pace, her hands in her pockets. She watched him climb the jungle gym, his movements cautious but eager. A group of kids his age were playing tag nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Owen watched them for a long moment, then turned away. Helena's heart twisted. She walked over and sat on a bench within view. A woman in a yoga outfit sat down beside her, bouncing a baby on her knee. "Is that your son?" she asked, nodding to Owen. Helena paused. "My nephew," she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. "He's sweet," the woman said. "Quiet, though. Shy?" "Something like that," Helena murmured. The baby gurgled, reaching for her mother's face. The woman laughed and kissed its tiny hand. Helena looked away, an unfamiliar ache settling in her chest. Owen came back to her after an hour, his cheeks flushed. He climbed onto the bench and leaned against her. Helena stiffened, unused to physical contact, then slowly put her arm around him. He felt small and solid and real. She realized with a jolt that she wanted this, wanted him, not out of guilt or obligation, but because for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. That night, she ordered Chinese food, and they ate straight from the carton sitting on the floor in front of the television. Owen laughed, a silent, shaking laugh at a comedy show, and Helena found herself smiling. When he fell asleep on the couch, she carried him to bed and tucked him in. His notebook had fallen open on the nightstand. On the last page, he'd written in small, careful letters, "Thank you." Helena stood in the doorway, her throat tight. She'd spent so many years building walls, convincing herself that distance was safety, but now those walls felt like a prison. And Owen, this small, silent boy who'd appeared out of nowhere, was offering her a way out. She just had to be brave enough to take it. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Helena had pulled Owen from the street. She stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. The words were clinical, procedural. Probability of avuncular relationship,
99.7%. She read the sentence 3 times, her hands trembling. Owen was hers. Legally, biologically hers. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. She found him in the living room, building a tower out of books. When she held up the paper, he tilted his head in question. Helena knelt beside him, her voice steady. "You're my nephew, officially, which means I can take care of you, if you want me to." Owen's eyes filled with tears. He nodded so hard his whole body shook. Then he threw his arms around her neck and held on. Helena closed her eyes and hugged him back, her own tears slipping free. But the relief was short-lived. 2 days later, a social worker named Janet Reeves arrived at her apartment for a home visit. Janet was efficient and brisk, her eyes scanning every corner as she asked questions about Helena's work schedule, her support system, her experience with children. Helena answered carefully, aware that every word was being evaluated. "And you're planning to continue working full-time?" Janet asked, making notes on her tablet. "I'm considering a reduced schedule," Helena said. It was half true. She'd been thinking about it, running the numbers in her head. "I want to be present for Owen." Janet nodded, but her expression was skeptical. "Children who've experienced trauma need consistency, Miss Marsh, especially nonverbal children. He'll need speech therapy, possibly occupational therapy, regular medical checkups. Can you provide that while maintaining your current career demands?" Helena felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the pressure of being judged and found wanting. But when she glanced at Owen, sitting on the couch watching them with wide eyes, she forced herself to breathe. "I can," she said firmly. "I will." Janet stayed for another hour, interviewing Owen separately using yes or no questions and picture cards. When she finally left, Helena collapsed on the couch, exhausted. Owen crawled up beside her and laid his head on her shoulder. She stroked his hair absently, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. That night, she made a decision. She called her senior partner, a man named Richard Chen, who'd mentored her since she was a junior associate. "I need to take a leave of absence," she said without preamble. 3 months, maybe 6. There was a long pause. "Helena, this is a critical time. The Brennan case." "I know," she interrupted, "but I have a family situation that takes priority." "Is everything all right?" "It will be," Helena said, and for the first time, she believed it. The custody hearing was scheduled for early November. Helena hired the best family lawyer she could find, a woman named Sandra Patel, who specialized in kinship adoptions. Sandra was direct and compassionate, walking her through every step. "The court will want to see that you're committed," Sandra said, "not just financially, but emotionally. They'll look at your bond with Owen, your ability to meet his needs." "I can do that," Helena said. Sandra smiled. "I believe you." The weeks leading up to the hearing passed in a blur. Helena learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos, even though Owen's hair was too short. She learned to cook more than eggs and toast, experimenting with recipes from a cookbook her mother had given her years ago. She learned the subtle difference between Owen's "I'm tired" silence and his "I'm upset" silence, the way his shoulders tensed when strangers stared at him in public. She also learned to ask for help. She joined a support group for guardians of nonverbal children, attended workshops on alternative communication methods, and connected with other families navigating similar challenges. It was uncomfortable and humbling, admitting she didn't have all the answers, but every time she wanted to retreat, she thought of Owen and pushed forward. Owen, for his part, was slowly coming alive. He started smiling more, playing with the art supplies Helena bought him, drawing pictures of trees and houses and people holding hands. He communicated through a combination of his notebook, a speech app on his tablet, and an elaborate system of gestures Helena was still learning to decode. One evening, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a calendar she'd hung on the wall. He pointed to a date in late November and looked at her questioningly. "That's Thanksgiving," she said. Owen frowned, clearly unfamiliar. Her chest ached. Of course he didn't know. Mara had probably been lost in her addiction to celebrate holidays. "It's a day when families get together and eat too much food and say what they're grateful for." Owen picked up his tablet and typed slowly. "Will we do that?" "Do you want to?" Helena asked. He nodded immediately. She smiled. "Then yes, we'll do that." But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days before the custody hearing, Helena received a call from Sandra. "We have a problem," Sandra said, her voice tight. "Owen's father has come forward." Helena's blood ran cold. "His father? Mare never mentioned." "His name is Derek Sullivan. He claims he didn't know Owen existed until he saw your petition filing. He's asking for custody." Helena's mind raced. Derek Sullivan. She didn't recognize the name, but Mara had been with so many men during her downward spiral. "Does he have any legal standing?" she asked. "If he can prove paternity, yes," Sandra said grimly. "Even if he's been absent until now, biological parents have rights. We'll need to fight this in court." Helena hung up and immediately looked up Derek Sullivan online. His social media painted a picture of a man who liked expensive cars and beach vacations, who posted motivational quotes and gym selfies. There was nothing about children, nothing about Mara. He looked successful, charming, and completely unprepared to raise a traumatized, nonverbal 8-year-old. But that didn't mean the court would see it that way. She sat Owen down and tried to explain, using simple words and his communication app. His face went pale when he understood. He typed furiously, "I don't want to go with him. I want to stay with you." "I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen," Helena promised, but the fear in Owen's eyes mirrored her own. The custody hearing became a battlefield. Helena sat across from Derek Sullivan in a sterile courtroom, her hands clenched in her lap. He was exactly as his photo suggested, polished, confident, and completely insincere. He spoke about wanting to step up and be a father, using the kind of corporate buzzwords Helena had heard 1,000 times from clients trying to spin bad press. Sandra questioned him relentlessly. "When was the last time you saw Helena Marsh?" "About 9 years ago," Derek admitted. "We had a brief relationship. I didn't know she was pregnant." "And in the 9 months since Miss Marsh passed away, why didn't you come forward earlier?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I only found out recently, when I saw the petition." "Convenient timing," Sandra said dryly. The judge's expression was unreadable. When it was Helena's turn to testify, she spoke about the past 8 weeks, the small victories, the daily routines, the bond she and Owen had built. She described his nightmares, the way he still woke up afraid, and how she'd learned to comfort him. She talked about the speech therapist they saw twice a week, the progress he was making, the trust he was beginning to place in her. "This isn't about biology," she said, her voice steady. "It's about what's best for Owen. And what's best for him is stability, consistency, and someone who knows him, someone who loves him." The judge called a recess. Helena and Sandra stepped into the hallway where Owen was waiting with a court-appointed guardian. He ran to Helena and wrapped his arms around her waist. She held him tightly, breathing in the scent of lavender shampoos she'd bought him. "We did well," Sandra murmured, "but it's not over." Helena nodded. She knew how these things worked. She knew the system favored biological parents, even flawed ones, but she also knew she wasn't going to give up. Not on Owen. Not on the fragile, precious thing they'd built together. As they walked back into the courtroom, Owen reached for her hand. Helena squeezed it gently, and he looked up at her with those amber eyes, Mara's eyes, full of trust and hope. Whatever happened next, she would fight for him. She would fight with everything she had.
The judge returned after lunch with an expression that gave nothing away. Helena's stomach churned as she took her seat. Beside her, Sandra sat poised and alert, ready to object at the slightest misstep. Across the aisle, Derek Sullivan leaned back in his chair, projecting confidence Helena knew was calculated. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimonies," Judge Marianne Coulter said, her voice measured. "I've also requested an independent evaluation of the child. Owen will meet with Dr. Patricia Lee, a child psychologist, tomorrow afternoon. Both parties will have the opportunity to be present, but not to interfere. Dr. Lee's assessment will weigh heavily in my final decision." Helena's heart sank. Another test. Another evaluation. She glanced at the guardian sitting with Owen in the back row. He was playing with a small toy car, oblivious to the fact that his entire future was being decided.
After court adjourned, Sandra pulled Helena aside. "This is actually good news," she said quietly. "Dr. Lee is excellent. She'll see through Sullivan's act. What matters is Owen's attachment to you. Make sure he knows he's safe no matter what happens tomorrow." Helena nodded, but her hands were shaking. That night she sat with Owen on the couch and tried to explain what would happen. "Tomorrow, you're going to meet a nice lady named Dr. Lee," she said slowly, watching his face. "She's going to ask you questions about how you feel, about where you want to live." Owen's eyes went wide with alarm. He grabbed his tablet. "Will you be there?" "I'll be there," Helena assured him. "I won't leave you." He climbed into her lap then, something he'd only done a handful of times. She wrapped her arms around him and rested her chin on top of his head. "No matter what happens, I'm not giving up on you, okay?" Owen nodded against her chest. She felt the dampness of his tears soaking through her shirt. The next afternoon, they arrived at Dr. Lee's office, a warm, colorful space filled with toys, books, and soft lighting. Dr. Lee was a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She greeted Owen at his level, not forcing eye contact, and invited him to explore the room. Helena and Derek were instructed to sit in chairs along the wall, silent observers. Derek kept checking his phone, barely paying attention. Helena watched every movement Owen made, her heart in her throat. Dr. Lee started with simple activities, drawing, playing with blocks, looking at picture books. She used yes or no questions, giving Owen space to respond in his own way. Then she pulled out a dollhouse and several small figures. "Can you show me your family?" Dr. Lee asked softly. Owen hesitated. He picked up a female figure with dark hair and placed it in the kitchen of the dollhouse. Then he picked up a small boy figure and placed it beside her. He stared at the arrangement for a long moment, then picked up a male figure and placed it far away on the other side of the table. Dr. Lee made notes. "Who is this?" she asked, pointing to the male figure. Owen looked at Derek, then at Helena. He picked up his tablet and typed slowly, "He is not my family." Derek shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. Dr. Lee's expression remained neutral. "And who is this?" she asked, pointing to the female figure. Owen's answer came immediately. "Aunt Helena, my family." Helena's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Dr. Lee continued the evaluation for another hour, asking about routines, fears, happy memories. Owen communicated with increasing confidence, using his tablet and drawings to express things Helena hadn't known he felt. At one point, Dr. Lee asked, "What makes you feel safe?" Owen drew a picture of Helena's apartment, the tall windows, the couch, even the calendar on the kitchen wall. In the corner, he drew two stick figures holding hands. Above them, he wrote in careful letters, "Home." When the evaluation ended, Dr. Lee thanked them both and said she'd submit her report to the court within 48 hours. Helena ushered Owen out quickly before Derek could approach them. In the car, Owen collapsed against her side, exhausted. "You did so well," Helena murmured, stroking his hair. "I'm so proud of you." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evaluation. She thought about Mara, wondered if Mara was watching somehow, if she'd forgive Helena for not doing more when it mattered. She thought about the life she'd built, sterile, controlled, safe. And she thought about Owen, who had shattered that safety and shown her what she'd been missing. The call came 2 days later. Sandra's voice was tight with excitement. "Dr. Lee's report is in. It's strongly in your favor. She concluded that Owen has formed a secure attachment to you, that removing him would be psychologically harmful, and that Derek Sullivan shows no understanding of Owen's specific needs." Helena gripped the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means we're going to win," Sandra said. "The judge scheduled a final hearing on Monday. Come prepared to celebrate." But celebration felt premature. Helena had learned not to trust good news until it was official. She spent the weekend in a haze of nervous energy, cooking meals she didn't eat,
cleaning an already spotless apartment. Owen watched her with concern, finally tugging on her sleeve and holding up his tablet. "Are you okay?" Helena knelt down to his level. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of nervous. Like, hopeful nervous." Owen hugged her then, fierce and sudden. Helena held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest. Whatever the judge decided, this was real. This bond, this love, it couldn't be undone. Monday arrived cold and gray. Helena dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit that felt both professional and approachable. Owen wore the button-down shirt she'd bought him, looking solemn and far too young. They met Sandra at the courthouse steps. "Ready?" Sandra asked. Helena nodded, taking Owen's hand. The courtroom was quieter this time. Derek sat alone at his table, his lawyer whispering urgently. Judge Coulter entered promptly at 9, her expression serious. She reviewed Dr. Lee's report aloud, highlighting key findings. Then she looked directly at Owen. "Owen, I've read what Dr. Lee wrote. I've seen the pictures you drew. I understand that you want to stay with your aunt. Is that correct?" Owen nodded, his grip on Helena's hand tightening. The judge's gaze shifted to Derek. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate your desire to be involved in your son's life, but involvement requires more than intention. It requires presence, understanding, and a willingness to prioritize the child's needs above your own convenience." Derek started to speak, but the judge held up a hand. "You've had 8 years to find Owen. You didn't. His aunt, who had every reason to remain distant, chose to step forward when he needed someone most. That tells me everything I need to know about who is prepared to raise this child." Helena's breath caught. Judge Coulter continued, her voice firm. "I am granting full custody to Helena Marsh, with the option for supervised visitation with Mr. Sullivan should Owen express a desire for contact in the future. This decision is final." The courtroom erupted in a controlled chaos of murmurs and movement. Helena heard Sandra's triumphant whisper, "We did it!" But all she could focus on was Owen. He was looking up at her with tears streaming down his face, his mouth open in a silent cry of relief. She pulled him into her arms and held him as tightly as she dared, her own tears falling freely now. "You're mine," she whispered into his hair. "You're safe. You're home." Owen clung to her, his small body shaking. Across the room, Derek stood up abruptly and left without a word. Helena didn't watch him go. She was too busy memorizing this moment. The weight of Owen in her arms, the smell of the courtroom, the overwhelming flood of love and gratitude and relief. When they finally left the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds. Owen held her hand as they walked to the car, and for the first time since she'd pulled him from that crosswalk, Helena felt like she could breathe.
Thanksgiving arrived with unexpected warmth. Helena woke early, the apartment filled with the smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon. She'd never cooked a full Thanksgiving dinner before, but she'd found a recipe online and decided to try. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair mussed from sleep, and stared at the chaos. Flour on the counter, vegetables half-chopped, Helena frantically consulting her phone. He walked over and tugged on her sleeve, holding up his tablet. "Can I help?" Helena smiled. "Absolutely." They worked together, Owen carefully stirring cranberry sauce while Helena wrestled with pie crust. It was messy and imperfect, and Helena burned the rolls, but when they finally sat down at the table that afternoon, she felt a fullness that had nothing to do with food. She'd invited Sandra and Dr. Lee, both of whom had become unexpected fixtures in their lives. Sandra brought wine and stories about her own chaotic family Thanksgivings. Dr. Lee brought a board game and taught Owen how to play. They laughed and ate and talked, and Helena realized this was what family was supposed to feel like: chosen, warm, and real. As dessert was served, Helena raised her glass. "I want to say something," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "A few months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought success meant a corner office and a 7-figure salary. I thought family was something other people had. She looked at Owen, who was watching her with those amber eyes. And then this kid literally crashed into my life. He didn't ask for permission, he didn't follow any rules, he just showed me what I was missing. Sandra raised her glass. To Owen. To second chances, Dr. Lee added. They clinked glasses and Owen beamed, holding up his juice cup to join them. Later, after the guests had left and the dishes were drying on the rack, Helena and Owen sat on the couch watching an old movie. Owen's head rested on her shoulder, his breathing slow and even. Helena stroked his hair absently, thinking about the past few months. She'd reduced her hours at the firm, taking on only cases that genuinely interested her. She'd reconnected with old friends she'd neglected, joined Owen's school's parent association, and started volunteering at a local organization that supported nonverbal children. Her life looked nothing like it had in September, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Owen stirred beside her, reaching for his tablet. He typed slowly, carefully, "Thank you for saving me." Helena's throat tightened. "You saved me too," she whispered. Owen looked up at her, questioning. She tried to find the words. "I was so focused on protecting myself that I forgot how to live. You reminded me." Owen considered this, then typed again, "I love you." It was the first time he'd said it, written it, and Helena felt something break open in her chest. "I love you too," she said, her voice cracking, "so much." Owen smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Helena had ever seen. He snuggled closer, and they sat that way until the movie ended and the city lights began to twinkle outside the windows. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm. Owen started at a new school with a strong special education program where he made friends with a girl named Lily, who also used a communication device. Helena attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every small milestone. She framed Owen's drawings and hung them on the walls of her apartment, transforming the sterile space into something that felt lived in and loved. On Christmas morning, Owen woke her at dawn, dragging her to the small tree they'd decorated together. He opened his presents with careful precision, saving the paper to reuse later. A habit I realized came from years of scarcity. When he unwrapped the art supplies and the new tablet she'd bought him, his eyes went wide. But it was the last gift that made him cry. Helena had found an old photo of Mara before the addiction took hold. Mara at 16, grinning at the camera with that same amber-eyed sparkle Owen had. She'd had it professionally restored and framed. "That's your mom," Helena said softly as Owen stared at the photo, "before things got hard. She loved you so much, Owen. She just got lost." Owen traced his finger over Mara's face, tears streaming down his cheeks. Then he looked at Helena and typed, "She would be happy I found you." Helena pulled him into her arms and held him while he cried. They stayed that way for a long time, mourning together, healing together. When Owen finally pulled back, he pointed to the photo and then to a spot on the mantel. Helena understood. She placed the frame there, between a drawing Owen had made of their family and the calendar that marked their new life together. As winter turned to spring, Helena and Owen planted a small garden on her apartment balcony. Owen chose tomatoes and sunflowers, watching them with intense focus every morning. When the first green shoots appeared, he danced in silent celebration, and Helena laughed until her sides hurt. She started documenting their life together, not for social media, but for Owen. She wanted him to have proof of this time, of how far they'd come. She took photos of ordinary moments, Owen doing homework at the kitchen table, Owen laughing at a cartoon, Owen asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. One Saturday in May, they returned to the crosswalk where they'd first met. Helena hadn't planned it. She was just walking through the neighborhood when she realized where they were. Owen stopped and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "This is where it started," Helena said quietly. Owen nodded slowly. They stood there together, watching traffic flow past, and Helena marveled at how much had changed. How a single moment, a single choice, not to look away, had altered both their lives forever. Owen reached for her hand. Helena squeezed it gently, and they continued walking, leaving the crosswalk behind. They had dinner plans at Morningside Brew, the coffee shop where Owen had first written his name in that battered notebook. The barista with purple streaks remembered them and gave Owen a free cookie, which he accepted with a shy smile. As they sat in their usual corner booth, Owen pulled out his tablet and typed, "When I grow up, I want to help kids like me." Helena's heart swelled. "That's a beautiful goal," she said. "You're going to do amazing things, Owen." He looked at her seriously, then typed, "Because you believed in me." "Always," Helena promised. "Always." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, the exact color of Owen's eyes, of Mara's eyes, of second chances and new beginnings. Helena paid the check, and they walked home through streets that no longer felt cold or distant. They felt like possibility. That night, Helena tucked Owen into bed and sat on the edge of his mattress, something that had become their routine. He liked her to stay until he fell asleep, and she'd learned to savor these quiet moments. Owen reached for his notebook, the same battered one he'd carried that first day, and wrote one more thing before closing his eyes. "This is the best family." Helena kissed his forehead and whispered, "Yes, yes it is." She turned the light off and stood in the doorway, watching him sleep. The boy she'd almost lost, the nephew she'd never known, the family she'd been too afraid to want. She thought about the version of herself from 6 months ago, cold, distant, convinced that control was the same as safety. That Helena wouldn't recognize this new life. And that was okay, because this life, messy and uncertain and full of love, was exactly where she was meant to be. Helena closed the door softly and walked to her own room. Tomorrow they'd make pancakes for breakfast, they'd work on Owen's speech exercises, they'd go to the park and feed the ducks. They'd live another ordinary, extraordinary day together. And Helena Marsh, who'd spent her entire adult life avoiding connection, couldn't wait.